We're joined now by Ben Jacobs, political reporter with The Guardian. Ben, walk us through the politics of this when Britain wakes up in a couple of hours.
The politics of it are going to be very, very messy when Britain wakes up. That you have the point where the Prime Minister, David Cameron, has staked his entire tenure in power on this, and it doesn't look like he'll be long for Downing Street. That you have the entire political establishment in the UK, the heads of all three major parties have rallied around this. That this is something that really represented sort of a populist upsurge from older, blue-collar, discontented voters, and it's poised to totally upset the apple cart of British politics.
Walk us through the parliamentary system here for the American audience. If Cameron resigns tomorrow, what are the next steps?
If Cameron resigns, the next steps would be the Conservative Party would have to go through the process of electing a new leader. In the meantime, it would be a question whether Cameron would resign when that process ended, or if there would have to be an interim prime minister who would end up, being asked, because you have the involvement of the Queen here as well as Conservative Party roles, who would end up presiding over in the meantime. But it's likely that Cameron would call for a Conservative Party election. He'd stay through until there's a new leader chosen, and then he'd gracefully step out of the way.
We here in the United States think of a resignation at the top of the government, the resignation of head of state, of being a shockingly dramatic event, even more dramatic than what we're seeing tonight in the UK voting to leave the European Union. Talk about the way parliamentary systems grow accustomed to these kind of sudden U-turns.
Well, parliamentary systems are built on it, that the United Kingdom actually just recently introduced fixed-term parliaments, which is an innovation, but that it's very normal for prime ministers to come, prime ministers to go, that in the past couple of decades you've had Tony Blair stepping down and letting Gordon Brown take over. You had Margaret Thatcher being dramatically forced out of power in the early 90s. That because it's about the tenure of Parliament, not specifically electing a prime minister for a fixed term, that things are less set and prime ministers will step aside
let's hold
as
it
time
there.
comes.
We're going to cut into ITV News to get the latest on the vote.
UKIP has done very well in the past. Just all voting for Leave, those areas were UKIP. Let's also look at coastal towns. Those were areas that we thought would be more likely to vote Leave. Just look at all of that support for Leave all around the coast in all of those key coastal areas that we'd identified as being ones to watch. Let's look at areas of the country where there were higher proportions of people who were retired, and let's just look at how well Leave has done. The only areas there where Remain has done is in Scotland, where there were entirely different reasons for that vote there. Let's also look at those areas of the country where there are highest proportions of the population who are white. So in those areas of the country that are most white, we see almost across the board those votes for Leave. And then we can also look at areas of the country with the fewest graduates, and those areas also being far more likely to vote Leave, and again with the exceptions being cities there and also up in Scotland. And so that's really the story of what's behind this vote. It's that UKIP vote, that coastal vote, those over 65s, those areas where most of the population was white and where there were fewest graduates, those predictors that we expected, we just didn't see the extent of this coming. And just to understand where these pockets are in relation to areas in the country, let's just focus in on that national picture again. What you can see there, I've been looking at that and studying it, and you just see that dense red around the Thames estuary. That's UKIP's heartland. That's where UKIP has done very well in recent elections, and we expected that very much. But then just look at Middle England. What we've got there is the East Midlands. That support for Leave being incredibly strong there. Move over to the West Midlands, where we again see that very dark red there, those clusters of support. Places like Dudley and Telford and Wrekin and Walsall and Tamworth really just voting Leave in very, very strong proportions. The North East above, we also see there very, very strong support for Leave, and then in Yorkshire and Humber as well. Just almost right across the board there.
Okay. We're going to go to Plymouth in a minute, so maybe we could just talk about that. We just talk about Plymouth very briefly.
Plymouth is one of the areas in those areas where UKIP has done the best. And I have to say, Tom, that just really leaves us at this point in the night of having absolutely no doubt whatsoever about how Plymouth's going to vote tonight.
It's going to be... Can I just, before we go to Plymouth, can I just... I just want to bring up one... Can we just bring up the national picture again? Because I just wanted to draw out one thing. What's happened in the last hour or two, it seems to me, we've had Alex Salmond sitting here suggesting that he wants another referendum and Scotland might be out. And you look at that picture, and whether you think he's got a point or not, that's a hard political thing to argue against, really, when you look at that. And you've had Mark Mallet just telling us that Sinn Féin now want a border poll, presumably to talk about, well, I guess, you know, the reunification of Ireland, a politically explosive subject, if ever I knew one in Northern Ireland terms. And look, you know, it is clearly true that Northern Ireland voted to remain. So I guess that is the evolving politics of the UK that we're going to be dealing with.
But Northern Ireland is still split on traditional lines in which Northern Ireland has always split, whereas with Scotland, you've just got that unified story of a vote for Remain. Absolutely in total contrast to the rest of, well, not the whole of England, but the majority of England.
It's a very, very fractured picture, to say the least. Now, maybe we can go to Plymouth. I think we are almost ready for an announcement there. But as Jane said,
covering the situation where the United Kingdom has voted tonight to exit the European Union. Going back to Ben Jacobs, political reporter with The Guardian. Ben, we just saw the way the vote broke down throughout the country, and fascinating to see that Scotland, where there's a very strong independence movement to be independent from Britain, they voted very strongly to stay united with the European Union.
Yes, Scotland almost unanimously stayed with the EU, and the leaders of the Scottish Nationalist Party are already saying this calls into question Scotland's further status in the United Kingdom. That one of the big pitches for Scotland to become independent in the first place was that it could stay in the European Union, could continue all the benefits of being in the European Union, that it didn't need to be part of the UK for that. And now this re-exacerbates that tension because Scots enjoyed the ability, it's a major economic boon to trade freely with Europe, and that grows the desire for independence there.
Dominic Rush, what do you make of what we just saw in the way the vote played out geographically in Britain?
I think it's extraordinary. Just that map was so telling, and in a way, what's happened tonight is we've seen part of England, an old part of England, like by age, voting to grab onto a country that's by and large they feel is escaping from them, and in doing that and in voting for this,
Can I just say something about the age for a moment? These people have to have only experienced independence from Europe when they were in high school. And I mean, it's been since 1973 that Britain has been involved with what was then called the Common Market.
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary to me. I mean, the benefits that the European Union has given us, Scotland is obviously a very clear example of that. They're voting because they want to be part of this union, they want those benefits, and we're seeing that in Northern Ireland as well. So in voting to leave, we now are in a position where we could lose Scotland and Northern Ireland as well and become an even smaller country. So bizarrely, and it's like the irony of it is that in kind of grasping for this kind of larger Great Britain past, we could end up being a much, much smaller country.
Ben Jacobs, the issue of Northern Ireland is different from Scotland in that the way the voters are divided there's a very strong, a majority with a very strong loyalty to Britain, think of themselves as British, and there's a minority that think of themselves as Irish, and that's why it has been this way for most of the 20th century. That dynamic hasn't changed. It seems to me the issue of Northern Ireland being able to vote for independence is much less likely in the way the vote breaks down there than Scotland.
Certainly, it's much less likely at this point that Northern Ireland has been driven by sectarian tensions for centuries between Protestants and Catholics, Protestants who want to stay in the Great Britain. But the economic dislocation that it's caused could be immense, that Northern Ireland for the past 30, 40 years has not had an effective border with Ireland. People go back and forth, people trade freely, that it's crossing the border is, there's no passports. That the dislocation this could cause if there becomes a new border, there becomes a need for passports, could create a whole new range of economic dislocation. And we would deal with different political dynamics there too because of the peace process, because of the fact there's been some steps towards healing the sectarian divide. It's still strong there, it's still far less likely than Scotland, but it's by no means a slam dunk that Northern Ireland would stay as a member of the United Kingdom if the UK withdraws from the EU.
Dominic Rush, the drama that we've seen tonight is something that is part of the economic equation. The financial analysts and people who are measuring economic activity don't like drama. They want days to be very calm from one day to the next because that's where they can find predictability. Try to describe for us what it is like in this world tomorrow for people who don't really have in their calculations a way of processing this drama.
Well, if you look at what happened this week, if you look at the markets, they start in the UK, and you look at what happened with the pound, they started to tick up because there was an assumption that Brexit was not going to be a factor. And in fact, if you ask most Americans last week what Brexit was, they probably thought it was some kind of new cereal bar or something. Nobody was really thinking about it. And now, so there was an assumption that really this was going to be meh, whatever, there's kind of a political row in the UK, it doesn't matter. Tomorrow morning, and as we're seeing tonight, we're going to see a big crash in the UK stock markets, and maybe it looks like we're going to see a significant fall off in US markets as well. So, and that's because these assumptions have been smashed. This vote was always going to be close, but I think a lot of people in the money markets just assumed that the UK would remain and the status quo would stay the same.
There are ways in which it has always been easier for the UK to exit the European Union than any other country, principally because they never adopted the currency. They did not give up the pound in favor of the euro. In that sense, they always had one foot near the door of the exit.
Yeah, we're an island, and we've remained an island, and we have an island mentality. We've always kind of seen ourselves as apart. But I mean, if I look at my own family, there's been a big split on the Brexit. My father's side of the family, big Irish Catholic family, like many of them have lived in France and Germany, etc. But there's a big divide between them, and part of it is because they don't like Europe. I mean, people in the UK and across Europe refer to Brussels in the same way that people refer to Washington here. It's, disparaging. It's like a bureaucratic place that wastes too much money and interferes too much in their lives.
All right, we're going to take a break right here. We will be right back.